Hello everyone, next vlog here. So obviously we're dealing with some pretty bad things in the news recently, of course, for the past week or so, and we've obviously been dealing with COVID for the past 2 years. So I thought this would be a good time to do this vlog. Been thinking about doing it for a while though. It's going to be a broad one. It's pretty much unplanned, but so essentially, I want to talk about positivity and negativity, and whether or not we should be reading certain types of books and writing certain stories over others. Broadly, so I'll give an example. Um, I speak with a friend quite a lot about. We have this long-term discussion about, for example, the difference between Thomas Ligotti's confrontational escapism and pessimism compared with something like Tolkien's more optimistic and positive worldview, his fantastical escapism, which ascribes meaning to things and ultimately comes out for the greater good. And I find myself more inclined to that viewpoint, despite writing dark fiction. Um, and I think Richard has. I think he's a bit more complicated in that respect. Definitely writes. He writes fiction that's dark, but not as it doesn't. I think doesn't ultimately come out to be as positive as I try to write my stories. You can see that in the work that I've got published and on the list of stories that I've described that aren't yet to be published. That are yet to be published. Turnip Head, for example, is a good one. Ultimately comes out for the greater good. The Bookworm as well. So I thought I'd read this just because, at the risk of sounding a bit too self-indulgent, I am going to read this thing from a website here that's encapsulates what I mean. So I say, uh, so many of my stories fall into the categories of weird and fantasy, though I have misgivings about those labels for a variety of reasons. Most of my work deals with outsiders' nature and questions of culture and aesthetics. And I say at the bottom here, overall I mostly try to write fiction that, while dark and challenging, aspires to a positive message because I don't often agree with the nihilism pervasive in this region of fiction. And that is broadly true. I do write fiction that is dark and sometimes quite almost not brutal, but that even if I'm writing something like I'm writing a story called written a story called Ferine. I don't want to spoil it too much, but that is a very dark story. It deals with some unpleasant things, and but ultimately the character changes for the better. Now, obviously, I'm not to say that most authors don't write stories like that. Of course, most authors, even if they're writing dark spheres, dark circles, they will have a broadly positive message. But there's a certain sphere or circle of writing that I want to try and distance myself from, if I can say it that way. It's a tricky thing because I write weird fiction, dark fiction. I've never really considered myself to write horror fiction. I don't really go in for that sort of thing. Just to give an example, another example, there's a great book, brilliant book, highly literary, great quality writing, Anti-Societies by Michael Sisko. And the title of that alone, I sort of shrink away from that. Um, so I shrink away from that, even though the stories involved in that book are they can be quite somber and melancholy and dark, and that's actually one of the distinctions I want to make. I don't really like this idea of like the acerbic quality of certain dark writers. The idea of gleefully like reveling in destruction and nihilism. I don't really think that's worthwhile. I don't really agree with it even. But something like Sisko's Stillville, I like that. It's dark and melancholy and somber. I guess the problem is I kind of shrink away from pessimism, like like absurdism, pessimism, nihilism, existentialism, and I once agreed with or was interested in those sorts of things, but not so much anymore. I mean, I see the value in it, but I just want to steer clear from that. I'll come back to that actually. Another thing I want to discuss and use as an encapsulation is this post I wrote on Reddit, sort of venting my frustrations at not really finding the right books to read. So I'm picky enough as it is, but this is a good example. I say the title I've written here is "Does the W in weird fiction have to stand for woe?" And I essentially say that I'm looking for weird fiction that isn't overtly nihilistic. I'm looking for cosmic horror that isn't always about existential dread. I say in brackets, why is cosmic horror the only really prevalent genre that relates to space and the unknown? And I say I want denouements, if that's how you pronounce that word, climaxes or resolutions that aren't always bleak. A character whose apotheosis doesn't involve a tiresome weird old dust sentiment. Apologies for just getting a phone call while I'm recording. So characters whose climax and resolution doesn't involve a weird old dust sentiment. I say I can get quite frustrated with the genres of weird and cosmic horror. It seems to me that most stories are purely negative affairs, acerbically so sometimes. I say that overall I'm looking for fiction that is well dark and challenging, has a positive and affirming message. The more I think about it, the stranger it becomes. What about the term weird fiction indicates existential dread and fear of the world and all things outside it, and yet it's pretty difficult to deny that this makes up the bulk of the genre. So things like, I don't know, I guess I'm sort of mixing this in with my sort of dislike of certain narrative voices and characters, but I just immediately think of things like Ligotti in a sense, although he has more likable characters than, for example, Laird Barron. Though I think that's the low. I think that's, for me, that is the low point in terms of fiction I want to read. That's not the right word, but yeah, I think you understand what I'm saying there. If there's a spectrum, Laird Barron I think would be my least favourite. So, just to bring it back a little bit, I do find myself struggling to find books, and I find myself struggling to answer the question: should I be reading lighter fiction or dark fiction? And obviously, there's the whole argument that can be made about against dark fiction. Against positive fiction, because positive fiction is, of course, it can be saccharine, it can be idealistic, it can be it doesn't really it doesn't confront reality as it actually is. But so there's this thing that I've noticed nowadays where I think I mentioned in the Marcus Aurelius review for Meditations on this channel, where I said, if you have the capability to be positive, why not at least try? Even if you feel like that positivity sort of betrays like a general outlook that you have in life or whatever, like in terms of aesthetics or whatever, philosophy, whatever it might be, if that makes any sense. Why not at least try? And I think that's, for me, the idea of spending time, however long it might be, on a short story, a novella or a novel. Why sit down and write something bleak? I can't get my head around confrontational escapism, which Ligotti seems to stand for. And I do write dark fiction, but I always try to speak out for the better side, what I view as the better side, the more positive side. Like I don't see why I would ever write a story that goes against what I would view as the world as I would want it to be. And I guess just coming back to sort of changes in outlook, I think I used to have this, again, I said I used to be interested in sort of existentialism, absurdism, and nihilism, and all that sort of stuff. The sort of in a word, sort of degradation, sort of the fall of man, and that sounds all highfalutin and sort of pretentious and whatnot. But I guess non-anthropocentrism would be another word to sort of encapsulate it. This sort of gleeful destruction of mankind and society. I don't really go in for that sort of thing anymore, which makes it a bit difficult to read to write and read weird fiction weird fiction, and even a lot of fantastical fiction nowadays seems to be sort of that edge to it. I'm not sure I really agree with. And I guess so. I kind of talked about both the writing side of things and the reading side of things. Just to dwell more on the reading side of things. I find it difficult to find a book nowadays to read. There are certainly books that I would enjoy reading in terms of weird fiction that I have looked at, but I just think that sometimes why not read something that is purely positive, and can inspire you and sort of and it hasn't like sometimes I think that I should be reading and writing just literary fiction that is just not even in the sphere of what I normally do, because oftentimes a lot of magazines and a lot of just places that I look at, that I'm familiar with and have some sort of affiliation with, I often just don't agree with the fiction that comes out of there, the messages that are messages that are given. So I think that's really what I want to. I think I'll wrap it up about there. Let me know what you think, and also let me know what you think of the vlogs as well, because I do find them interesting. And obviously I'm aware that my reviews are sort of few and far between, and that mostly comes down to the not really finding a book to read. I've been very picky when it comes to reading books. Actually, that's a very good point. Actually, I was going to talk about the channel, but I just realised. So one of the things it's a good example here, Dostoevsky. I've read his works before, and that's a good example of dark fiction that ultimately comes out to a better message, and it's obviously a Christian worldview. I'd much rather read Dostoevsky than anything that's coming out of. You know what? I'll leave it there. Liable to get myself in trouble with certain viewpoints. But yeah, so this is a good example of dark fiction that is positive, because as bleak as Dostoevsky is, it comes out to a positive message in the end, a positive outlook, I think. Anyway, so that's this vlog done. I think just let me know what you think. If you enjoyed the vlog, if you found it interesting, if you found it, I anticipate that I might get for some of the things that I've said, I might get lose a few subscribers. That's fine. But no, if you want to comment, if you want to argue against what I'm saying, I mean, obviously I just want to stress here that I don't mind dark fiction, of course. I think it's valuable. I think that ultimately upholding society, upholding nature and heritage, and the spirit and beauty is more valuable than a lot of the stuff that you see in books nowadays, especially in circles that I'm aware of. Anyway, that's kind of another thing. I'm kind of attacking or just challenging writing circles, but obviously it's more broad than that. Of course, it's do we read light fiction or do we read? Because sometimes there's this whole ego thing, isn't there? There's this whole. I'm not sure what the word is. This idea of you dwelling in it. It's sometimes I feel I'm not actually sure what the psychological response is, but it's good to dwell on dark things, obviously, and I find dark things aesthetically valuable and interesting, and I appreciate dark things in that sense, and that's all fine. It's just that that I think you can wallow in it too much. I think I'll leave it there. Yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed that. I think the next review I'll be doing is probably Mervyn Peake's Boy in Darkness. That's something I want to get around to. So thanks for watching, everyone. Till next time. Cheers.